Welcome to day 217 on the trail. We have four readings for today. From Mark 15, verses 6 through 32, 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 14 through 13:34, 2 Chronicles chapter 9, verse 13 through 11:23, and 4 Maccabees chapter 11, verses 1 through 27. Today, we will spend our time in 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles. But please take time to reflect on the events leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus in Mark chapter 15. Beginning in 1 Kings chapter 11, we begin to witness the downfall of King Solomon. External to Israel, we learn that God himself raises up enemies from Moab and Aram. From 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 14. Then the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was of the royal house of Edom. And then in verse 23, God raised up another adversary against Solomon, Rezin, son of Eliad, who had fled from his master, King Hadadezer of Zobah. Then, internally, Jeroboam, a member of the tribe of Ephraim and a servant of Solomon, also rebelled against the king. While we are not given a specific reason why Jeroboam rebelled against Solomon, we are told that God is behind this uprising. The prophet Ahiah comes to Jeroboam with this message, beginning in verse 31. He then said to Jeroboam, "Take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. See, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and will give you 10 tribes. One tribe will remain his, for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. This is because he has forsaken me, worshipped Astarte, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the Ammonites, and has not walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight, and keeping my statutes and my ordinances, as his father David did." So as quickly as someone rises in wealth, power, and prestige, he falls. Due to his lack of faithfulness to God, the nation will be divided. Only the tribes of Judah and Benjamin will be left to the house of David. The remaining 10 tribes will be given to Jeroboam if he follows the commandments of God. And most importantly, God will be with Jeroboam. Listen to what God says to Jeroboam, beginning in verse 38. "If you will listen to all that I command you, walk in my ways, and do what is right in my sight by keeping my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, I will be with you, and will build you an enduring house, as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. For this reason I will punish the descendants of David, but not forever." Jeroboam is presented with an incredible opportunity. God is offering to be with Jeroboam. As we have seen throughout the trail, this is one of the most common, important, and overarching themes throughout the entire Bible. In the early chapters of Genesis, God searches for Adam and Eve in the garden after they have eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God asks, "Ayeha, where are you?" In the story of the Exodus, God chooses to travel with Israel during their sojourn in the wilderness. Also, as we just saw in the construction of the first temple, God allows his name to be placed in a building constructed by David and Solomon. And then, in the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew begins with Jesus being called Emmanuel, which means God with us, and ends with his great promise in Matthew 28, "I will be with you always, to the very end of the age. The greatest gift to Jeroboam is not the kingdom, but this gift of God's presence. However, that gift is also conditional on Jeroboam's willingness to be with God. Now it seems that Solomon learns of God's promise to Jeroboam, and instead of repenting of his actions and lack of faithfulness to God, Solomon seeks to kill Jeroboam. Continuing in verse 40. Solomon sought therefore to kill Jeroboam. But Jeroboam promptly fled to Egypt, to King Shishak of Egypt, and remained in Egypt until the death of Solomon. Following the death of Solomon and the ascension of his son Rehoboam to the throne, the 10 northern tribes secede. The actions of Rehoboam are quite foolish and ill-advised. However, I would like to focus on Jeroboam and God's promise. We are not told when, but at some point after becoming king of the 10 northern tribes, Jeroboam begins to fear that if the people living in the north and under his rule were to continue to travel to Jerusalem for the Jewish holidays and festivals, and to offer sacrifice at the temple in Jerusalem, they would then return to Rehoboam and Judah. As we have often seen, instead of trusting in the presence and will of God, Jeroboam succumbs to the fear of loss and political insecurity. Therefore, Jeroboam attempts to protect his throne and power by isolating the people from Jerusalem. Continuing in 1 Kings chapter 12, beginning in verse 28. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. He said to the people, "You have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." He set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Earlier, in the story of the Exodus, we found the creation of a golden calf as an object of worship. And the words and imagery found here in 1 Kings is very similar and should not be overlooked. We recall Exodus 32, beginning in verse 3. So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from them, formed it in a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Moses was delayed on Mount Sinai, Aaron created a golden calf as an object of worship. And for creating this golden calf, Moses broke the first tablets containing the covenant with God, and Israel was severely punished. Now Jeroboam has created 2 golden calves and positioned them at the northern and southern borders of the 10 tribes of this new northern kingdom of Israel. Therefore, despite God's great promise of his very presence, Jeroboam, and Israel with him, seems to turn away from God almost immediately. I wish we had more time today to talk about the story of the man of God from Judah who speaks against the altar which Jeroboam constructed in Bethel. There's a lot to discuss in this story, including the importance of identifying the marks of authentic revelation from God, which is becoming increasingly more important today. I hope to return to this story in our next journey along the trail. Finally, please note that the author or authors of 2 Chronicles have left out the information found in 1 Kings 11, verses 1 through 40. Specifically, we do not find information regarding Solomon's numerous wives and concubines, God's decision to remove 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel from Solomon's kingdom, Solomon's worship of false gods from neighboring kingdoms, the problems raised by Edom and Aram, or even the final rebellion of Jeroboam. As we mentioned earlier, Solomon and his father David are painted in a much more favorable light in 1st and 2nd Chronicles than in the books of Samuel and Kings. However, this was not intended to be a deception. After all, we still have the books of Samuel and Kings, and they are part of the same Hebrew canon. If they truly wanted to rewrite history, then they would have disposed of Samuel and Kings and replaced them with the writings of the chronicler. Instead, 1st and 2nd Chronicles focuses on the importance of the first temple in Jerusalem and the builders of that temple. This would have been especially important for the Jewish people who were returning from exile and were now faced with constructing the second temple. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.